Most drivers think a traffic stop begins when the officer reaches your window, but for police it starts the second those lights hit your rear view. They're already watching your hands, your eyes, your movements, your passengers, even the way you end the stop. In this video, I'll break down the subtle behaviors cops analyze and how each one can be used against you. Excessive nervousness and visible anxiety. Officers receive specific training to identify what they call indicators of deception and criminal activity, and nervousness sits at the top of that list. The problem is that nervousness during a traffic stop is completely normal. Your heart rate increases, your hands might shake, you might stumble over words. These are natural physiological responses to confrontation with authority figures who carry weapons and have the power to arrest you. But police training materials teach officers to interpret these signs as potential indicators of illegal activity. They're watching your hands for trembling. They're listening to your voice for cracks or stammering. They're observing whether you can maintain eye contact. They're noting whether your breathing is rapid or shallow. They're watching for sweating, particularly on the forehead and upper lip, even when the temperature doesn't justify it. An officer who observes what they perceive as excessive nervousness will often document this in their report as justification for extending the stop or requesting a search. Courts have unfortunately allowed nervousness to serve as one factor among several that can establish reasonable suspicion. Here's how the legal framework operates. Under Terry versus Ohio and its progeny, officers need reasonable articulable suspicion to extend a traffic stop beyond its original purpose. Nervousness alone typically isn't sufficient, but when combined with other factors, it becomes part of the totality of circumstances analysis that courts use to evaluate whether the officer had legal justification for their actions. The officer writes in their report that the driver exhibited extreme nervousness inconsistent with a routine traffic stop. That language then appears in court documents, and suddenly your sweaty palms become evidence supporting a search that revealed nothing illegal but consumed hours of your time and thousands in legal fees. The solution here isn't to somehow force yourself to remain calm, because that's nearly impossible when someone with a gun stands at your window. Instead, you acknowledge the dynamic openly. You can say something like, "Officer, I want you to know I'm a bit nervous right now because I've never been in this situation before," or simply, "I'm feeling anxious, but I want to cooperate with whatever you need." This accomplishes two things. First, it takes away the officer's ability to characterize your nervousness as consciousness of guilt because you've provided an innocent explanation on the record. Second, it often humanizes the interaction and can actually de-escalate the officer's suspicion because guilty people rarely announce their nervousness openly. They try to hide it. By naming the emotion, you demonstrate awareness and transparency rather than deception. You've also created a record. If this ever goes to court, your attorney can point to your statement as demonstrating innocent nervousness rather than guilty conscience, avoiding eye contact or making too much eye contact. Police training creates a paradox here that's almost impossible for citizens to navigate. Officers learn that avoiding eye contact suggests someone is hiding something or being deceptive. The training materials actually cite studies on deception indicators that claim liars look away more frequently. Simultaneously, they learn that prolonged eye contact can indicate aggression, challenge to authority, or an attempt to appear calm while actually being deceptive. This contradictory framework means you literally cannot win this evaluation. Look away and you're suspicious. Maintain eye contact and you're suspicious. This ambiguity serves law enforcement because it allows them to characterize almost any behavior as supporting their desired conclusion. I've reviewed hundreds of police reports over my career, and I've seen officers write that the suspect avoided eye contact, suggesting deception, and I've seen officers write that the suspect maintained intense eye contact in an attempt to appear innocent. The same behavior gets characterized as suspicious depending on what conclusion the officer has already reached. This subjectivity is a feature of the system, not a bug. It gives officers tremendous discretion to justify their instincts with behavioral observations that sound objective, but are actually interpreted through the lens of their pre-existing suspicions. The solution is natural, intermittent eye contact combined with directing your attention to practical matters. When the officer speaks to you, look at them. When you're retrieving documents, look at what you're doing. When you're answering questions, you can glance at them and then look forward through your windshield. The key is avoiding both extremes. Don't stare at your lap for the entire interaction, but also don't lock eyes with the officer like you're in a staring contest. Behave the way you would in any normal conversation with a stranger where you're also completing a task. The most important protection here is understanding that whatever you do with your eyes, an officer who wants to find suspicion will find it. This is why you never consent to searches regardless of how the officer characterizes your demeanor. Your eye contact pattern patterns are not probable cause, and they shouldn't open doors to fishing expeditions. Reaching or moving before the officer reaches your window. This is critical, and most people get it wrong. The natural instinct when you see police lights is to immediately start preparing your documents. You want to be helpful. You want the interaction to go smoothly. You want to show the officer you're cooperative by having everything ready when they arrive. This instinct will hurt you. When you start moving around inside your vehicle before the officer arrives, you create what police call furtive movements. These are movements that the officer cannot see clearly from their position behind your vehicle, which they're trained to interpret as potentially reaching for a weapon, hiding contraband, or destroying evidence. Police training emphasizes that the approach to a stopped vehicle is one of the most dangerous moments in law enforcement. They're taught that suspects use this time to prepare ambushes, retrieve weapons, or conceal evidence. This training creates hypervigilance during the approach. An officer watching a driver moving around inside the vehicle is an officer whose hand is closer to their weapon, whose mindset is more adversarial, whose interpretation of subsequent events will be colored by those initial observations. More importantly, those movements get documented in the police report. The officer writes that upon approach, they observed the driver making furtive movements in the vehicle. This language appears in thousands of police reports across the country and serves as one factor supporting probable cause for searches. Defense attorneys see this phrase constantly, and it's difficult to challenge because it's subjective and observational. The solution is counterintuitive but protective. When you see the lights, pull over safely and then stop moving. Turn off your engine, place your hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and wait. Do not reach for your license. Do not open your glove box for registration. Do not adjust your mirror. Do not take off your sunglasses. Do not turn down your radio. Do nothing. Sit there with your hands visible and wait. When the officer arrives at your window and asks for license and registration, that is when you say, "Officer, my license is in my back pocket and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for those now." Then you move slowly and deliberately while the officer watches. You announce each movement before you make it. "I'm opening the glove box now." This approach eliminates furtive movements from the equation entirely. The officer sees exactly what you're doing at all times. They have no basis to claim they couldn't see your movements or that you appeared to be reaching for something. You've narrated your actions before taking them, creating a clear record of cooperation and transparency. Providing too much information voluntarily. Officers are trained interrogators. Even patrol officers receive training in conversational interview techniques designed to elicit information from subjects. One of the most effective interrogation techniques is simply allowing silence to create discomfort. Most people cannot tolerate silence, especially uncomfortable silence with an authority figure staring at them. So they fill it. They start explaining where they're going, where they've been, why they might have been speeding, who else was in the car earlier, what they're doing in this neighborhood, why they seem nervous, what their schedule looks like today. Every single piece of information you volunteer is potential evidence or potential justification for extended investigation. Let me give you concrete examples of how innocent information becomes problematic. If you say you're coming from a friend's house in a neighborhood the officer knows has drug activity, you've just given them a reason to be more suspicious, even though visiting a friend is perfectly legal. If you say you're late for work and that's why you were speeding, you've just admitted to the violation, making a ticket almost certain and eliminating any chance of a warning. If you mention that your friend who was in the car earlier smokes marijuana, you've just given the officer a reason to search your vehicle for residue. If you say you've been driving all night, you've invited scrutiny for impaired driving. If you mention you're not from this area, you've potentially invited questions about why you're here. None of these statements involve admitting to crimes, but all of them provide threads for an officer to pull. The solution is responsive minimalism. You answer direct questions with direct answers, nothing more. If the officer asks where you're coming from, you can answer that question, but you don't then volunteer where you're going, why you were there, who you were with, what you did there, and when you're expected somewhere else. You answer the question asked and then stop talking. If the officer asks a follow-up question, you answer that one and stop talking. If there's silence, you let there be silence. You don't fill it. You're not obligated to make conversation. You're not obligated to explain yourself. You especially don't volunteer explanations for your behavior, apologies for potential violations, or any information about the contents of your vehicle or your recent activities. Remember that you have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You're not required to help the police build a case against you. Being polite and being talkative are two very different things. You can be courteous, respectful, and cooperative while still being appropriately brief in your responses, having passengers who behave inconsistently with the driver. Officers are trained to observe the entire vehicle, not just the driver. They're watching passenger reactions from the moment they exit their patrol car. They're comparing body language between occupants. They're looking for inconsistencies that suggest deception or coordination. If you're calm and your passenger is visibly panicked, that's a red flag in their training. If your stories about where you're headed don't match up, that's a red flag. If a passenger keeps glancing back at a particular area of the vehicle, that draws the officer's attention to that area. If passengers seem to be communicating non-verbally, the officer notices and notes it. Police often separate drivers and passengers during stops, specifically to compare their answers and look for inconsistencies. They'll ask you where you're going, then walk to the passenger window and ask your passenger the same. Question: if your passenger says you're going to dinner and you said you're going to a movie, that discrepancy becomes documented evidence of deception. Officers interpret inconsistent statements as indicating that the occupants are lying and coordinating a cover story. This is particularly problematic because you cannot control what your passenger does or says. You might have answered honestly while your passenger panicked and gave a different answer, or your passenger might have simply misunderstood the plans. But the inconsistency goes in the report regardless of the innocent explanation. The solution has two components. First, before any interaction with police, your passengers should understand that they're not required to answer questions beyond providing identification if your state requires it for passengers. Many states don't require passengers to identify themselves at all during routine traffic stops. Your passengers can politely decline to answer questions about the trip, its purpose, or its destination. Something like, "I'd prefer not to answer questions, officer," is a complete response. The officer might not like it, but not liking something doesn't make it illegal. Second, if you must have conversation during the stop, keep responses aligned with what the driver has already said, or simply defer to the driver entirely. Passengers can say, "I'm just along for the ride. You'd have to ask the driver about our plans." Passengers creating alternative narratives or adding unnecessary details only complicates the interaction and provides additional threads for the officer to pull. The safest approach is for everyone in the vehicle to understand beforehand that minimal, consistent communication is protective for everyone. Physical indicators of impairment or recent drug use. Officers receive extensive training in what they call drug recognition evaluation. The full drug recognition expert certification involves over 100 hours of training, specifically focused on identifying impairment through physical observation. Even officers without full DRE certification receive basic training in these techniques. They're watching your eyes for dilation, constriction, redness, or watering. They're observing your speech patterns for slurring, rapid speech, or unusual rhythms. They're noting whether your movements are coordinated or sluggish. They're watching for tremors, unusual body movements, or difficulty with fine motor tasks. They're even trained to identify the smell of various substances, including marijuana, alcohol, and certain chemicals associated with drug manufacturing. The problem is that many completely innocent conditions mimic these indicators. Allergies cause red, watery eyes. Fatigue causes slow speech and sluggish movements. Certain medications cause pupil dilation or constriction. Medical conditions like essential tremor affect coordination. Some people naturally have speech patterns that could be misinterpreted as impaired. But officers often interpret these signs through the lens of their training, which primes them to see impairment. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you've spent 100 hours learning to identify drug impairment, you start seeing it everywhere. The solution is to never submit to field sobriety tests if you have any choice in the matter. In most states, these tests are voluntary. You're not required to perform them. The walk and turn test, the one-leg stand, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, where they watch your eyes track a stimulus, all of these are subjective evaluations performed by an officer who already suspects impairment. They're performed under stressful conditions, often on uneven pavement with traffic passing by, while you're nervous and being watched critically. Even perfectly sober individuals fail these tests regularly. Studies have shown significant failure rates among sober subjects, particularly for individuals who are overweight, elderly, or have any physical limitations. These tests are designed to generate evidence of impairment, not to accurately assess whether you're actually impaired. If an officer asks you to step out of the vehicle for field sobriety tests, you can politely decline by saying, "Officer, I've been advised by my attorney not to participate in field sobriety tests. I'm not refusing to cooperate with your investigation, but I respectfully decline to take those specific tests." In most states, there are no legal consequences for refusing field sobriety tests. Chemical tests are different. If you've been arrested for DUI, implied consent laws in most states mean you'll face license suspension for refusing a breathalyzer or blood test. But field sobriety tests are a different matter entirely. Don't give the officer subjective ammunition to support their conclusions. If you're actually impaired, the test will hurt you. If you're sober, the test still might hurt you. There's no winning scenario that makes these tests worth taking. Vehicle condition and items in plain view. From the moment an officer approaches your vehicle, they're conducting a visual inventory of everything they can see. This is completely legal. The plain view doctrine allows officers to observe and potentially seize anything visible without a warrant. If there's a marijuana pipe on your passenger seat, that's in plain view and can be seized. If there's a weapon visible, that changes the entire dynamic of the stop. But officers are also looking at less obvious things that inform their assessment of you and your vehicle. Fast food wrappers scattered around might suggest you've been living in the vehicle or that you've been driving for an extended period without stopping properly. Air fresheners, particularly multiple ones or very strong ones, often appear in police reports as an attempt to mask drug odors. I've read countless reports where officers cite the presence of air fresheners as one factor supporting their suspicion. Tinted windows beyond legal limits give officers additional basis for the stop and sometimes additional suspicion about what you might be hiding. Energy drink cans might suggest fatigue that could indicate impaired driving. Personal items scattered chaotically suggest disorganization, which some officers associate with impaired states or instability. Even the general cleanliness of your vehicle creates an impression. Officers are also looking for specific items associated with drug activity. Small plastic bags, even if they're sandwich bags for actual food. Digital scales, even if you use them for cooking or postage. Cigar packages, which are associated with marijuana blunts. Multiple cell phones, which can be associated with drug dealing. Large amounts of cash visible, which raises questions about its source. None of these items are illegal to possess, but all of them appear regularly in police reports as factors contributing to reasonable suspicion. The solution is awareness of what your vehicle communicates before you ever encounter police. Keep your vehicle reasonably clean and organized. Ensure nothing that could be misconstrued as drug paraphernalia or evidence of illegal activity is visible. This doesn't mean hiding illegal items, because you shouldn't have illegal items. It means not having legitimate items that look suspicious sitting in plain view. That digital kitchen scale you use for meal prep should be in your trunk, not on your back seat. Bags of white powder that are actually protein supplements should be in their original containers, not visible loose. Legal prescriptions should be in their labeled bottles, not loose pills in a bag. Even legal items can create problems if they're misidentified in the moment. Think about what an officer scanning your vehicle might see and how they might interpret it with suspicious eyes, then organize accordingly. Prevention is significantly easier than explanation. Your phone behavior during the stop. Modern policing has evolved to include significant attention to electronic devices. Officers are trained to watch for phone behavior that might indicate coordination, warning accomplices, or destroying evidence. They watch whether you reach for your phone when you see their lights behind you. They observe if you're texting while pulling over, which could be construed as warning someone. They note if the phone screen suddenly goes dark as they approach, suggesting you just locked it or closed an app. They pay attention to whether you're trying to record them and how you're doing it. Any of these behaviors can be characterized as attempting to warn others, destroy evidence, or coordinate stories with people elsewhere. Additionally, phones themselves have become subjects of intense interest during traffic stops. The data on your phone can tell an incredibly detailed story about where you've been, who you've communicated with, what you've searched for, and what photos you've taken. Officers sometimes ask to see phones, ask questions about phone content, or try to get you to unlock your phone in their presence. All of these requests are fishing expeditions for evidence. The solution is to not touch your phone from the moment you see police lights until the stop concludes. Leave it wherever it is. If it's in your hand, when you see the lights, put it down and leave it down. Don't text anyone that you're being pulled over. Don't try to warn anyone about anything. Don't try to start recording by picking up your phone. Though, if you have a dash cam running or can activate recording without picking up the phone, that's fine. If your phone rings during the stop, let it ring. If you have passengers, they shouldn't be on their phones either. If the officer asks about your phone, asks who you were texting, asks to see your messages, or asks to look at your phone, you decline politely. I'd prefer not to discuss my phone or its contents, officer. If they ask to search it, your answer is no. I don't consent to searches of my phone. The Supreme Court ruled in Riley versus California that police generally cannot search your cell phone incident to arrest without a warrant. The court recognized that phones contain vast amounts of personal data, far beyond what could be found in a traditional search incident to arrest. This protection extends to traffic stops. The data on your phone is constitutionally protected. Don't volunteer access to it, and don't consent to searches of it under any circumstances. Your response to requests versus commands. This distinction is critical, and officers are trained to blur it intentionally. A request is something you can decline. A command is something you must comply with or face potential arrest for obstruction or failure to comply with a lawful order. The linguistic difference is often subtle, and officers exploit this subtlety to gain compliance with requests by making them sound like commands. When an officer says, "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle?" that's phrased as a request. When they say, "Step out of the vehicle," that's a command. When they say, "You don't mind if I take a look in your trunk, do you?" that's a request. When they say, "Pop the trunk," that's phrased as a command, but is actually a request because they cannot order you to consent to a search. Officers often use request phrasing for things they know they cannot legally compel, because many citizens don't understand the difference and will comply automatically. "Mind if I search your vehicle real quick?" is a request regardless of how it's phrased. The answer is no, you do not consent, but most people say sure because it sounds like they don't have a choice. The phrasing often includes social pressure tactics. "You don't have anything to hide, do you?" implies that only guilty people refuse searches. "This will just take a minute and then you can be on your way," implies that refusing will lead to prolonged detention. "I'm going to search your vehicle, okay?" makes it sound like it's going to happen regardless, and you're just being asked to agree after the fact. All of these are requests, not commands, and all of them can be declined. The solution is to listen carefully to whether you're being asked or told. If you're uncertain, you can ask directly and clearly. "Officer, am I required to do that, or are you asking for my consent?" This question is not confrontational, it's clarifying. If the officer says it's required, you comply, because resisting lawful commands creates additional legal problems and can escalate the situation dangerously. If it's a request, you're free to decline politely. "Officer, I don't consent to searches of my vehicle." You don't need to explain why. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to argue about it. You simply state your non-consent clearly and then stop talking about it. The officer may search anyway, claiming they had probable cause or some other exception to the warrant requirement. That's a matter for your attorney to challenge later. But if you consent, you've waived your Fourth Amendment protection and made any such challenge impossible. Your consent is a gift to law enforcement. Don't give it. How you end the interaction and behave afterward. Officers watch your behavior as they walk away from your vehicle just as carefully as they watched it when they first approached. They're observing whether you seem relieved in a way that suggests you successfully concealed something or got away with something. They're noting whether you immediately grab your phone, potentially to warn someone that the coast is clear. They're watching whether you turn to talk animatedly with your passenger, potentially discussing what just happened in ways that suggest you were hiding something. They're observing your driving behavior as you pull away. A traffic violation committed immediately after a stop can bring the officer right back to your window, and the second stop will be much more suspicious than the first. Officers can and do follow vehicles after traffic stops. Sometimes they follow for miles, waiting for a traffic violation that justifies another stop. Sometimes they follow to see where you're going, particularly if they're suspicious but didn't have enough to search. Your behavior in the minutes after a stop can either confirm or dispel whatever suspicions the officer had. If you speed away, swerve, fail to signal, or drive erratically, you're giving them everything they need for another stop. If you immediately drive to a location associated with criminal activity, that information might appear in a future investigation. The solution is to maintain composed, careful behavior until you're genuinely away from the area and certain you're not being followed. When the officer returns to their vehicle after concluding the stop, you wait. You don't immediately speed off. You don't grab your phone. You don't make loud comments to your passengers. You put away your documents calmly and deliberately. You adjust your mirrors normally. You put on your seatbelt if you removed it. You check your mirrors again. You signal your intention to merge back into traffic. You pull away at normal speed, accelerating gently. You drive normally, obeying all traffic laws meticulously for at least several miles. Only after you're well away from the area, certain you're not being followed, should you call anyone, discuss what happened with passengers, or decompress from the stress of the interaction. The stop isn't over until you're confident the officer is no longer observing you. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.